Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Muhammad and today we will start a journey to learn Angular. This is part 1 of our series to cover Angular from all different aspects. We will be building an application which will connect to an API, pull data, validate input, authenticate users, and many more functionality. In this first part, we will be focusing on Angular fundamentals as we will be building our first component. So, what are we going to be covering today? First, we're going to discuss what is Angular, why do we want to use Angular, the anatomy of an Angular application, the ingredients that we're going to be needing in order to build our application, and then we're going to be starting coding. As always, you'll be able to find the source code in the description down below. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like this video. It will really help the channel. So, what is Angular? Angular is a JavaScript framework for building client-side applications using HTML, CSS, and TypeScript. Angular in its current format has been released since 2016 and has been updated ever since. And currently we are on version 11. Angular is a very popular JavaScript framework for building client-side application. So why use Angular? Angular makes HTML more expressive. It adds features to it like if conditionings, loops, and local variable. Angular as well makes data binding way more easy because it tracks changes, process updates from the user inputs. As well, Angular has a modular design. It creates building blocks that will allow us to reuse them all across our application. As well, Angular utilizes a very modern framework, which takes the latest features from JavaScript and adds support to our legacy and new browsers. It has a simplified API, so we can use all of its functionality and libraries very easily. It's built for speed. So it's really it's really fast to load and render. It has a really low rendering time. It has built-in support for communication with backend services. As well, it enhances our productivity because we can have a lot of functionality right out of the box. So, what is the anatomy of our Angular application? An Angular application is formed basically of three things: components, services, and modules. As we can see from this diagram, an Angular application can have multiple components, as well it can have multiple services. So, what are components? Components are basically JavaScript library or TypeScript libraries that is formed of three different sections: from a template, from a class, and a metadata. So the templates basically holds the HTML. Basically, it defines the look of that component. It has all of the Angular directives, all of the Angular bindings, all of our HTML, and basically it's the looks of our component. A class is basically the brain of the component where all of the functionality lies in. It's based on TypeScript. It has all of the methods, all of the data property that we're going to be needing, all of the connection to any services that we might use. Everything rely in a class. And lastly, the metadata. The metadata is the information part of a component where we tell Angular what is this component. We add the decorator into it and we add all of the function definition to it. We're going to be discussing every single one of these parts in more details. Now we're just having a general overview about it. Next, what is a service? A service is typically a class with narrow, well-defined purpose. Basically, it's like a class that has one single purpose that we define, and it can be used across our application. A service is usually used for fetching data from the server, validating user input, and logging directly to the console. What is a module? Angular modules helps us organize our application into functionality blocks. Every Angular application has at least one module which can be called the root Angular module. An application can contain additional modules which can provide additional features. So as we can see from this diagram, we have the root Angular module, which is basically the root where every component service within our application lives inside this module. And as well, we can integrate different modules that we can either create like a different TypeScript module or Angular module, and we can actually integrate within this module, or we can just utilize the one single module that our Angular application comes with. So just to summarize, an Angular application is formed of three main components. Three main parts, as we want to say. First, a component. Second, a service. And lastly, a module. And the module is basically the main canvas that all of those different parts lives in. So what do we need to start developing an Angular application? We're gonna need a code editor, which is gonna be in our case Visual Studio Code. As well, we're gonna be needing Node.js, which is gonna be the JavaScript framework that's gonna allow us to create our Angular application. You can find the links on the screen as well on the description down below. Now we need to set up our project. Before we do anything, we need to make sure that we have Node installed successfully. In order to do that, we need to type inside our terminal npm-v. And this we can see it's giving us the version number, which is 7.7.6, which is the latest version at the current of this recording, which is great. So the next step is we need to install our Angular CLI in order for us to utilize Angular. In order for us to do that, we're going to be utilizing npm i-g, which make it global, which is going to be make it Angular available anywhere within the operating system. And then we're going to put at Angular/CLI. This should take, I think, roughly around 30 seconds to complete. And after that, we're going to be able to utilize the Angular CLI directly into our terminal. Perfect. Now that has been installed, let's now create our Angular application. In order for us to do that, we're going to be utilizing the Angular CLI. And in order to utilize Angular CLI, we're going to be utilizing the ng keyword. And then we're going to be utilizing the new keyword. And then we're going to be giving the application a name, and we're going to call it my-app. And this should also take roughly a minute. And then there's a couple of questions that the application going to ask us, and we're going to go through them one by one. So first thing is going to ask us if it's going to be checking for strict bundles. For the purpose of this sample, we're going to say no. And then if we're going to ask us if we're going to require Angular routing, we're going to say yes. And then it's going to ask us what type of style sheet do we want to use. We can use any types of the available style sheet. But for the sake of this sample application, we're going to be utilizing CSS. So all we need to do is press enter. And then this process is going to take roughly around another 30 seconds to a minute, depending on your internet connection, because basically it's going to be downloading those packages and then creating the application. And once that's done, we can actually open our application and start developing. Now that our application has installed successfully, now let's open the application, our code editor. We're going to be utilizing Visual Studio Code. Perfect. Now our application has opened. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to open the terminal. So view terminal. Perfect. And before we do anything, let us first examine the structure of our application. As we can see from the left hand side, we have several folders that the Angular application has automatically created for us. So let's delve deep into what are these folders and what do they do. The first folder that we have is E2E. E2E means end-to-end testing. For the sake of this sample application, we're not going to be delving into this, but maybe in the future videos, we're going to have a unique video just to cover end-to-end testing within Angular. The second folder is the Node modules. Basically, these are all of the libraries that Angular used when we created the application and downloaded them and from Node actually, and then it's stored them here. And the third folder is the source. So the source file is where all of our source code lives in for our Angular application. Basically, we have the app where we are going to put all of our source code into it. So inside the folder here, we have app and all of our code is gonna go here. And then we have our index.html. Basically, it's gonna be the main entry point of our application. And then we have the styles.css, and basically it's all of the CSS that we're gonna add to our application if we're gonna install any other libraries here. This is the summary of our application. There's a lot of different folders that we're gonna be delving into it once we need them, but this is the main structure of our application. And for the Node module is all of the npm dependency that exists there. And just to give a quick check what exists there, if we go, for example, to our package.json, we can see that we have a lot of Angular dependencies and all of packages that have been installed. And if you want to see if this has been downloaded and installed successfully, all we need to do is go to the node modules, and we can see that we have all of these libraries available for us to use. So for example, we have the Angular CLI. If we go all the way up at the add, and we can see that the Angular here has been installed. And if we open it, we can see that we have the Angular CLI and the compiler CLI available for us. So that's really good. Now, once we have done that, let us just run our application and see what do we get. In order for us to run our application, we're gonna be utilizing the ng, which is basically using the Angular CLI, and then we're gonna be utilizing the ng serve keyword, and then -o. -o means open it. So let's click on enter. This should take also a few seconds. And now that our application has completed successfully, we can see it has opened in our browser. And we can see this is the default application or interface that we got within our Angular application. Perfect. This means that the CLI has installed successfully, our application has been created successfully, and all of the dependencies has been also been installed successfully. Great. So the next step for us right now is we're gonna be actually started developing our application. And the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna be creating a hello world components just to understand the full concept of a component as much as we can before creating the actual functionality that we're gonna be building. So let's go back to our code editor and let's create a new component. So how do we create a new component? So inside our source folder, we have, as we discussed before, we have an app folder, and inside this app folder, we're going to be creating a new file, and this file is going to be called hello.component.ts. And basically, this is going to be our hello world component. Perfect. And as we have discussed before, a component is formed of three things. It's formed of a template, a class, and the metadata. So first of all, we're going to be creating the class. So we're going to use the word export because we're going to make this class available anywhere within our application class, and we're going to call it hello world component. Great. And the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna define that component. So we're gonna add the information to it, basically the metadata. And in order for us to do that, we're gonna do the at component. And as you can see here, it has a red squiggly lines, basically because we didn't do the right import for it. So if we if we actually click on enter, we can see that Visual Studio Code automatically adds that import for us. So great. So now we do this. Now let's define this component. First of all, every component needs to have a selector and needs to have the template where the HTML is gonna live in. So the selector is basically, it's gonna be the HTML tag that we're gonna be utilizing in order for us to call this component into the main HTML. So let's call this selector for now hello world. So we're gonna say selector colon, and we're gonna call it hello-world. And then we're gonna define a template. A template basically is the HTML, and we can basically have a different file which is gonna be its own unique HTML, but for the sake of the hello world component, we're just gonna make it an inline HTML. And how do we do that? Basically all we need to do is type template and then a colon, and then we're just gonna say h2. I'm gonna say also do some bindings here. We're gonna discuss what bindings are later, but for now all I'm gonna say here is a title, and we forgot to put a colon here, comma here. Perfect. And now let's define this variable title here so we can see it's actually working. So we'll put a variable title, and we're gonna make it of type string, and we're gonna give it the default value of hello world from Angular. Perfect. Save. So now we have our first component ready. It's a very simple component. It has a a decorator, which is going to be the component which will define the selector, which how are we going to be referring to it. We're going to see how are we going to use it right now. We have added the template, or basically the HTML of this component. As well, we have created the class, and we have created a variable inside this class that only has a title with type string. So how do we make this component run within our application now? So as we have discussed before, every component within our Angular application must belong to a module, and our hello world component is no different. It needs to be belong to a module, so we need to add it to a module. How do we do that? It's very simple. Inside our app folder, we can see that we have our app.module.ts. Basically, inside this file, we have all of our modules and all of our imports that we need. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add this component. So here we're gonna say import, and we're gonna call it hello world. And then we're gonna define when can Angular find it. So we're gonna say from, and then we're gonna put / and it's called the hello.component, as we can see here. And then we need to put the semicolon. And after we do that, we need to make it hello world component. Forgot to put the word component, I apologize. And once we have that, we need basically to add it to the imports, to the declarations. So once we do that, we need to type a comma, and then we put hello world component. Perfect. Now we have this is ready. All we need to do is decide where are we going to be showing this component. So as we said, we have our index.html, which is going to be the main entry point of our application. So let's see what does it have inside of it. So if we click on it, we can see that it's referring to an app root component, and this app root component is the main component that our application is all bootstrap inside of it. So let's take a look at that file. So if we look inside the source app, we can see that we have app.component.html, we have app.component.ts, and we have app.component.css. Perfect. So we know that the app.component.ts is the actual component where all of the logic is going to happen. So this is not where we're going to add it. We have the app.component.html. Basically, this is what we saw before. So what we're going to do right now, let's us rerun it and see that it's exactly the same thing that we currently have. So ng serve-o. And this will also take a few minutes because it's going to build the component that we have just added. And once we do that, let's navigate to our web browser and let us refresh. And we can see this is it exactly as it was before. It means that all of the code that we have added is still running perfectly. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to basically delete all of this boilerplate code that we got, except the last one. So let us delete all of this. We don't really need any of it. So Ctrl+A, delete, and save. And now if we go back to our application, we should see an empty page. Perfect. This is what we wanted. And now let us add our hello world component that we have created. So let's go back to it. And basically, as we said, if we go back to the hello.component.ts, we can see that we have our selector here. And our selector here means this is the new HTML tag that we have created and that Angular will be able to recognize in order for it to load that component. So let's take the selector and let's put it inside our app.component.html. So similarly to how do we declare any HTML page, any HTML tag. So we're gonna put like this, and then we're gonna put hello -world, and then of course it needs to have a closing tag. And once we do that, we save it and let's wait for it until it compiles, and has compiled successfully. And now if we refresh, we can see that we have hello world from Angular, which is basically the outcome that we have expected, because inside our hello.world.component we have basically just have an h2 with a title. Let's say here I want to add, let's say a br for example, and I want to add to this br let's say I want to add for example an h1 saying, let's say within this h1 we're gonna say Angular is very cool, and let's save this. and we can see that automatically recompiles because we have that ng serve still running, and we can see right now it has automatically compiled, and all of the changes that we did within our hello world component is automatically reflected. Perfect. So let us go back and let us stop this application. So the next step for us basically is we're gonna be adding Bootstrap to our application so we can utilize the layouts that Bootstrap give us, so we don't really have to do all of the styling ourselves. So how do we utilize Bootstrap into our application? First of all, we need to install its npm package. So inside our terminal, we need to type npm install Bootstrap. And also this will take roughly a few seconds, and now we have seen like Bootstrap has installed successfully. And now if we open the package.json, we should see Bootstrap has automatically been added here, and we can see that Bootstrap has been added correctly to us. Perfect. So next step is for us to add Bootstrap libraries into our Angular application. Right now we have installed the Bootstrap dependency into our application, but right now Angular does not know where does these libraries exist. So in order for us to do that, what we need to do is we need to update the styles.css. So styles.css, which is outside the app source, the app folder, and inside the source folder we have something styles.css. If we click on it, all we need to do here is to import the Bootstrap class that we have. So how do we do that? We need to type @import and then URL, and then inside this URL we're gonna define the Bootstrap path. We're gonna be utilizing the tilde and then bootstrap /dist /css /bootstrap .min.css. We're gonna use the min version of it. Perfect. Once we save it, this means right now Angular will automatically knows where is to pull down the Bootstrap CSS. And since this is the styles.css, it means that the Bootstrap library is available across all of our Angular components. Great. Now let's start by creating our user component. And by definition, since we're gonna be since we're gonna be creating a new component, and this component it's gonna have its own template, it's gonna have its own interface. We're gonna discuss what an interface later on. So it's gonna have its different files for itself. So the better approach is to have its own unique folder. So inside our app folder, it's by the way, every single file for Angular, every single piece of code that we need to write for Angular needs to live inside the app folder. So inside our app folder, let's create a new folder, and we're gonna call this folder users. Perfect. And inside this users folder, what we're gonna do first is we're gonna be creating our template. And basically, as we said, template is the looks of our component, so it's the HTML. So we're gonna create a new file inside this users folder that we just created, and we're gonna be calling it user-list.component.html. So basically this is where all of the HTML for our new component was basically gonna be a user list. And this, before we delve into it, let's describe what this component is gonna do. This component is gonna be showing us the list of users that we currently have. And in order for us to have the list of users, we're gonna be displaying them in a table. And we're gonna create this interface inside the user-list.component.html. So great. So first of all, what we're gonna do, since we already have Bootstrap enabled, we're gonna just create a div, and we're gonna use class row. We're gonna be utilizing Bootstrap classes, and then we're gonna put div class equal call -md-12, and we're just basically creating some Bootstrap classes and some divs in order for us to organize our table. And then we're gonna create a header. So first of all, let's do a div class, we'll call it a card here, and then inside this one we're gonna create a card header. Gonna div class card dash header. Perfect. And then we're gonna call this header user list. Great. And then after that we're gonna create the card body, which is basically gonna contain we're gonna add the functionality to filter the users list based on their names. So let's add a filtration box, and let's put a div class equal card dash body, and inside of this we're gonna have another row, div class row, and let's create right now the label, basically call dash md dash 2, and this label is gonna say just filter by, and then we're gonna add a text box which is gonna take the input from us. So we're gonna put div class call dash md, let's put it dash 6. Yeah, dash 6 should be fine. And then we're just gonna, for now, we're just gonna define an input without any information inside of it of type text. We're gonna be changing this later on. And then after that, let us define, let's create a different row. So div class row, and then we're gonna just display what are we gonna filtering. So class call dash md dash 6 for now, and we're gonna be displaying an h2 with h5 for example, and we're gonna put filter by, and here we're gonna displaying what are we gonna be filtering by. And after that we're gonna just create a table. So let's do a div class, we'll call it table dash responsive, and all of these classes are basically bootstrap classes that we can utilize anywhere within our application because we have already installed bootstrap. And then we're gonna define a table. Great. And we're gonna give it a class table. And then if we open here the table, we need to add the header, so th, and this table header is gonna have another tr, and then we're gonna basically put name, email, phone, and country. So first is gonna be th name. Let's copy this, copy. So we said name, email, phone, and country. Great. And now let's create an empty table body, and perfect. So right now we have created our template. Now it's time to create our actual class for the component. So how do we do that? Again, inside the users folder, we create a new file, and we're gonna call it user-list.component.ts, which is gonna be of TypeScript file. And first of all, we're gonna just basically create the class. So as we said, in order for this class to be accessible anywhere, it needs to have an export. So export, and then we'll put a class. And what are we gonna call this component? We're gonna call it user list component. Perfect. Once we do that, as we said before, we need to add a declaration for it. So we need to add component, and if we just type @com and press tab, Visual Studio will automatically do the auto completion for it, and we'll add the required import. And then we need to open a bracket and then curly braces, and then we need to add the selector. And the selector, as we said before, is what are we get the HTML tag that's going to be referring to this component. So let's type selector, and then we need to type what are we gonna give this a selector. We can just make it user-list, as simple as that, and then put a comma, and then basically now we need to define the template. The template, as we said, is the HTML. So in our hello world, we did the HTML directly inside here. So this is that's one way of doing it. But if we're gonna have a much more complicated HTML, it's always better to have a unique folder for it. This is why we have created the user list component.html, and we can refer to it here. In order for us to do that, we can go to template URL, as we can see here, and then we need to put a colon, and then just define the path for that file. It's gonna be user-list.component .html, and if we save this, perfect, now we have our first component, actually our second component, ready for us to use. So again, this component is also ready for us to use, but right now Angular does not know anything about it. So what do we need to do now? And if you thought that we need to add it to the module, that's correct. We need to add it to the app module. So let's go here, and as we did to the hello world, first we need to do the import for it. So we do import, and we're gonna, what did we call it? Let's double check that. We called it user list component. Let's copy this and let's add it here, and then put from, and then basically we're just gonna add the path to that file because it is inside a folder. What we need to do is we need to add the users, and then we need to go through that folder, and then we add the user-list component. And after that, we're gonna put a semicolon, and again, after we do the import, we need to add it to the declaration. So it's always a two-step inside the module. First we import it, then we add it to the declaration. We'll put a comma, and then we put user list component, and now this component should be available to anywhere that we need inside our application. So again, we're going to be adding it to the app.component.html, which is the root component that we have, and inside of here, let us just let's add it after this, and we can see how what was the I think the selector, I think it was user-list. Let us double check this. Yes, user-list. So let us add it here. We'll put user-list. Perfect. And now if we click on save and run our application, ng serve-o, this should take also a few seconds for it to build. And once this application builds, we can go to our web browser and we can actually see it there. Now it started building. Perfect. Now if we refresh and we go to our web browser and let us refresh it, and we can see that our table has automatically been created for us. Our field, text field for the filtration has automatically been created. Nothing is functional and there's no information, but at least now we know that the template that we have created is actually displaying correctly. And we can see we have two different components running at the same time, which is what we need. And we can see that all of the wiring and the pipelining for our Angular component has been done successfully. Perfect. So after that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be displaying some information coming back from the class into our template. In order for us to do that, we're going to be going through bindings. And so what is bindings? So basically, bindings coordinate the communication between the component class and its template. Often it involves passing data back and forth between the two. We can provide values from our class to our template, and our templates will provide us with actions. So basically, as we can see here, templates and class communicate with each other. So the class sends to the template the display information that we want to show, and the template sends to the class all of the events and all of the values that has been changed from the user inputs. So binding is always within a template. So when we write any of the binding code, it always exists within the actual template. The class is responsible to handle any changes or, for example, any events that coming out of these bindings. As well, it's responsible to send and provide data to those binding inside our template. So we can see here that the class here and the template here have a two-way communication. The first one is to receive the information, and the second one is between the class and the template. The class sends the information to the template, and the second way of communication is between the template and the class, which is sending the information back if there's anything has been changed, or if there's any actions or there's any event that has been raised on the template. The class needs to be able to capture it and actually perform the actions against it. So let's go back to our code. And inside our code, the first binding that we're going to be doing is a one-way binding. It means that we're only going to be displaying information. We're not going to be receiving any events, or we're not going to be receiving any value back. So this one-way binding we're going to be currently utilizing is just to change the component title. So first, let us stop this application. Let's go back to our user.list.component.ts. And the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a new variable. And this new variable, we're gonna be calling it page title. And this page title is gonna be of type string. And then this page title is gonna have a default variable. So default value, and this value we're gonna be calling it, for example, user list title, for example. And right now we have created this page title, but now how are we gonna display this title inside our template? So the way we can do that is basically we're gonna be using interpolation. And how are we gonna be using that? It's also very easy. So we're gonna be replacing this hard-coded title with the one coming back from the component. So we're gonna be using these curly braces, and then we're gonna be putting the variable that we have created there. And the variable we have created here is called page title, and we need to respect the camel casing. So P has to be lowercase and T has to be capitalized. So we're gonna put here page title, and we'll save this. And right now if we run the application again, ng serve-o, this will take also a few seconds. And now that the application has compiled successfully, let's open our browser and refresh this. And we can see that the title has changed from user list to user list title. Now let's go back to our code editor and let's us change this. For example, let me add my name to the title to make sure that's actually picking it up. So let's say put by Muhammad Lawand, and let's save this. And now right now if we refresh this, we can see it has automatically picked it up. And if I go back and I remove it, it automatically removes it. Perfect. So this is one-way binding based on string interpolation, which basically we're just sending information from the class to the template. So it's a one-way street. So right now if we do anything within the template itself, the class will not know about it because we only did a one-way binding. Perfect. So the next step or the next point that we're gonna be discussing is directives. So what are directives? Directives are custom HTML elements to extend the HTML functionality that Angular's provide for us. So, for example, once we have installed the Angular CLI and we have installed all of the Angular installed all of its libraries, within those libraries we have something called directives, and those directives Angular provide for us to utilize inside our template HTML. And there's two types of directives. The first type is the built-in directives. The built-in directives are directives that Angular provide for us outside of the box. We can directly use them without worrying about anything. The second type is custom directive that we have to build and we can then utilize inside our application. So the built-in directives, the most two common used are the ngIf, which is Angular if statement, and the ng4, which is Angular for loop directive. Let us start utilizing the ngIf inside our application. So let us go back to our source code and let us stop the application. And first, let's go back to the web browser so we can discuss what are we gonna do for the ngIf. What we're gonna do is we're gonna hide this table if there is no data inside this table. So this way we're gonna be utilizing the ngIf. So in order for us to do that, we need to have first some data inside our table. So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code, and inside our user-list.component, here let's add a new variable, and this variable is gonna be called users. And for now, and only for now, we're gonna be utilizing the any keywords. Well, what does this mean? It means that we can create like an anonymous object. If you know from object-oriented programming, it's basically an anonymous object which Angular doesn't really care about what type it is. All it needs is we can put any, and it will automatically figure out its type on runtime, and it will automatically inject it into our template. And because TypeScript is a strong type language, It's not really recommended to use that, but for the sake of this sample right now, we're going to be utilizing any. Within the next 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to be changing that to using a more strongly type. But for now, we're just going to be using that in order for us to populate the template with some information. So right now we have any array, so we're just going to create any random array, and this array is going to contain some information about our users. So we're going to create for now just 3 users, and those users basically first going to contain user ID, and we're going to give it the ID 1. I'm just going to put my name, and then we're going to put full name. Perfect. And then I'm going to put Muhammad Lawand, and then we're going to, as we said, we're going to put the email address, and this email, let's put muhammad@email.com. Great. The second one is going to be the phone number. Perfect. And this phone number is going to be, let's put it as integer 123 123. Great. And last country, let's put Lebanon. Great. Now the second user we're going to be creating, let's put user ID. Sorry, we need to put it inside commas. So user, in quotation, sorry, user ID, ID equal to full name. I think let's put Mr. Richard Feynman. Perfect. And then the email address, we're gonna put just richard@email.com. And the phone, we're just gonna put any random number. We're gonna put 111-222-333. And lastly, we're gonna put the country. We're just gonna put United States. Perfect. And let's put another user so we are able to see it. And let's put this user ID. Let's copy paste this way faster, and then we change the values. So user ID is gonna be 3, and here we can put, for example, Neil deGrasse Tyson. And we'll put neil@email.com, and let's put 999-000-999, for example, and it's also from the United States. Perfect. Now we have created our information, our user list. What we're gonna do is let's go back to our template, and inside our template we're gonna add something which is very simple, which is gonna be those directives that we have discussed before on the actual table, which is gonna be here. All we're gonna do is, if the user list contain information, you need to show this table. If not, you're not gonna show anything. And how do we do that? All we need to do is type star, which is basically we're telling Angular that you need to use a directive. We're gonna be using the ngIf, and then you're gonna put equal, and then we're gonna add the condition, which is gonna be user.length, because it's an array of users. So we need to check if the user.length is bigger than 0. So user.length. So basically the user.length here is similar to this. So just so we can understand what is it doing. So this one is basically checking user.length if bigger than 0, and if it's bigger than 0, it's displaying it. If not, it's hiding it. So this is what's happening right now. So basically it's like this: true and false. So basically it's checking if the user length is bigger than 0, show it. If not, don't show it. So let's save this and let us build this application. So ng-serve-o. This should take also a few seconds. Okay, so we have an error which is saying that there's an issue with the templates. So let's go back to our component and let's see what's the error. Okay, so here we have said users, but in our front end we said user. So all we need to do is add an S here and click on save, and we can see it has automatically recompiled successfully and it has loaded. So let's go back to our web browser and let us refresh it. And we can see right now, because we have information inside our array, the table has been showing. Great. Now let us delete this information. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and from here let us just create an empty array. So for now I'm just gonna cut out this information. Just cut. I'm gonna put save, we can see it has recompiled again, and if we go back here and we refresh, we can see that it has automatically removed that table because there is no information inside of it. Great, so now we know that the if directive is working, and now let's put it back and save again, and let's go back here. Perfect, we can see the table is showing. Great, so this is summarized basically the ngIf that we have, the first directive. The second directive we're going to be using is the ng4, and basically we're going to be populating this table with the information that we have provided earlier. So how are we going to be using that? Very easy. We'll have to go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's stop the application, and inside our template, inside that tbody, we need to basically add tr star ng4 equal, and here we're gonna specify the looping conditions. So creating a variable called user and of users. So basically we're looping on the users list that we have. And how are we going to be displaying this information? We're going to be using the string interpolation in order for us to display this information back. So first what we can do is let's do a td, and then basically, as we said, we're going to be utilizing string interpolation, and then inside of it we're going to put users dot, for example, first is going to be full name, and let us copy this, and okay, great, and then full name, then it's going to be email, and then it's going to be, I think, phone, and then I think lastly it's going to be country. Great. So right now we're just utilizing another directive, which is star, which star means that we're telling Angular that you need to go to the directives and find this ng4, and once the Angular finds it, we're basically specifying the conditioning for our for a loop, which is basically telling it on what is it gonna be looping through. So we declared a variable which is called user. So for every time every item within that list, when it comes, it's going to go into users, and then basically we're telling it you need to loop through users, and then we're displaying the information of every user it's looped through. It's very simple and straightforward. So let us go back to ngserve and let us run the application again, and this should also take a few seconds. Great. Now that we have this open, let's go back to our web browser, and now we can see the information has automatically been populated for us. We have the names, we have the emails, we have the phone, we have the country. Everything is provided for us as we are expected. Perfect. Great. So now we have utilized the two main directives that Angular provide for us, which is the ngIf and the ng4. So the next step for us is we're gonna create a functionality. Basically, we're gonna make it like a two-way binding. Basically, the template is gonna be sending a request, and the class needs to take this request and process that request. So what are we gonna be doing now? We're gonna be adding a new button, which is gonna be basically show and hiding the phone numbers. So that way the template is going to be sending a request to the class and telling it to display or hide the phone numbers. How are we going to do that? It's also going to be quite easy to do, and we're going to have to go back to Visual Studio Code, stop the application, and first of all we need to navigate back to our component, and inside our component we need to add a new variable, and this variable basically it's gonna be referring to the value if we're gonna be showing or hiding the phone numbers. So it's gonna be of type boolean. So after users here, okay, great, let's create this new variable. We're gonna call it show numbers, show phone, actually it's better, show phone number, let's put it NB. Great. And then we said it's gonna be of type boolean, and we're gonna say by default it is false. So by default we're not gonna be showing anything. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna be declaring a method, and this method is gonna be responding to the action that the template's gonna be doing. So how do we declare a method? First, we need to specify the name of that method. Then we're gonna be specifying the return type of that method. And since this method is not taking any parameters, we're not gonna be defining any parameters. So first, let us define this method. Let's put here a comment defining a new method. And here, basically, we're gonna call this method show phone number. Let's call it, let's call it show numbers. Let's call it that. And then this is the name of our method, and then we're gonna specify the return type. And since it's not gonna be returning anything, it's gonna be of type void. And then after that, basically, we're gonna be just doing the opposite of what show phone number is. So, actually, we can change this to phone visible. Is it better? It's better like that. So if it's false or true, let's put it phone number visible. Okay. So basically, this method here is gonna just switch the status of phone number visible. So for now, basically, it's gonna do if phone number visible equal not this dot phone number visible. So what does this mean? So we need to put this here as well. Great. So basically, what we're doing here is we're taking this variable that we have created, and since it's a boolean, we are putting the opposite value of it. So the exclamation mark here means like get me the opposite value of your value. So if it's true, it's gonna save it as false, and if it's false, it's gonna be saving it as true. Perfect. Let's save this, and now let's go back to our template, and inside our template we're gonna be adding a new button, and let's add the button here next to the filter by. So let's put in a new div class, and we'll set call -md-6, and basically here we're gonna be creating a button, and this button's gonna be let's put a class btn-small we wanted, and we btn-primary, and these are all bootstrap classes. You can go to bootstrap.com and you can explore all of the different classes that we got from there. And we're gonna put a name inside of this. We're gonna just, for now, we're gonna show button, show phone numbers, and we're gonna change this to make it more dynamic. So once we show the number, it's gonna convert to hide phone numbers, and once it's hiding it, it's gonna switch to show phone numbers. So once we have those, show phone number and hide phone numbers, now let's add some functionalities to it. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna be adding a click functionality. Basically, whenever the user click that phone number, it's actually gonna call that method, which is gonna be called, what did we call that method? I think we called it show numbers. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna be utilizing the click functionality of the button. So we do parentheses, and then we define the click. That's the action that we wanna capture. And then inside of here, we're just gonna call the method that we have, which is gonna be show numbers, and we put this parentheses on it. So basically, we're calling that method directly from here. And the next step is we need to update this TD here in order for it to show and hide. So in order for us to do that, a very simple solution is we put this phone number inside a span. So we create a span, and let's save this inside the span. And a simple solution as well is if that condition, which is or if that value here, which is phone number visible, is true, it's gonna show it. If phone number visible is false, it's not gonna show it. So let us do that. So how are we gonna do that? If you thought about using the if directive, which is ngif, we are correct. So we put start ngif equal, and basically we're just gonna put the condition directly here. So it's gonna be, I think, we'll show number the variable. Phone number visible. Let's copy this. Perfect. So the if condition here, let us do a summary next to it so we know what does it mean. So all of this doing is if basically phone number visible equal true, show. If not, hide. That's all it's doing. So right now, this is the functionality. So if phone number is true, it's showing the phone number. If not, basically it's showing the span. If not, it's not showing it. So let us run this application and see what happens. ng space serve-o. This should take also a few seconds to complete. Perfect. Now let's go back to our web browser and let's refresh this. And now we can see that we don't see the button, but we see the phone number. And now once we refresh it, we have that button has created for us. And as we said, by default, it wasn't showing the number. So if we click on it now, we can see that the number is showing. And if we click on it again, it's hiding, show and hide. But we can see one thing here, that the actual text of that button still say show phone number even if it's showing. So we need to update this to hide that phone number, to change show to hide in case the phone number is showing. How do we do that? Also very simple. Let's go back to our Visual Studio Code, and inside of that we need to update the text for the button. Where is the button? Okay, it's here. So how are we gonna do it? We're gonna be simply using again a string interpolation, and we're adding the conditioning inside of that string interpolation. So excuse me. Okay, great. So first what we're gonna do is we're gonna be checking if show number is actually phone number visible, if it's actually true or false. So let's copy this. And all we're gonna do is basically use JavaScript logic in order for us to do that. So if phone number visible equal to true, the text is gonna be hide. If it's not gonna be to true, it's gonna be show. So basically this line here is basically a pure JavaScript file, which may basically checking, because this is a boolean, which is only have two values, which is true or false. So we're checking if phone number visible is true, we need to show the word hide. If it's false, we need to show the word show. So okay, save, and now let's refresh and go back to our web browser and refresh this page. And now we don't see the phone number, so we have the right word which is show, and if we click on it again, we have the phone numbers and the text has changed to hide. Perfect. So now within this example, right now we have used both directive, which is the for the if statements, and then we did two-way binding between the template as well as our class. Great. So one last thing what we need to do before we finish the video for today, which is going to be part 1, is we're going to be making the filter field working inside our application. So how are we going to be doing that? In order for us to make the filter work, what we need to do is we need to utilize the form modules. And the form modules are it's a library which is Angular provide for us out of the box. So let us add this to our application. First, let's go back to Visual Studio Code and stop our application. Then we need to go to our modules, app.modules.ts, and we need to add that import for it. So let's add it here, import forms module. And this form module is out of the box, Angular provided for us without us doing any extra work. So all we need to do is just specify that we need that. So it's going to be within @Angular forms. Great. So once we have added the import, we need to add it to the import list inside our module. So here after the app routing module, we need to add it, and that's it. Right now we can utilize the form modules across the application. Great. So the next step is let us go back to our component class and let us add a new variable here. Basically this variable is gonna save the information for the filtration. So we're gonna call it list filter, and it's gonna be of type string, and it's gonna be empty. Great. So now this filter is gonna be binding directly to that text outside the text box outside inside the template. So the next thing we're gonna be doing is we're going to go to the template, and we need to update the text box to take advantage of that. So how do we do that? Since we have already added the form module into the module class, so we can utilize it across our components and templates. So we need to do it. We need to do a bracket, then a bracket and a bracket, I think, and then here we need to do the ng model. We're telling it what type of model does it need, and basically we're just telling it that it's gonna be the list filter variable that we have created. Perfect. Now that we have that, now that we can see that our filtration is not working, so let's go back and try it out. So let's go to ng serve-o and let's see if this fixes it. It's not gonna fix it, but I just want to make sure and show you guys that it still didn't fix it. So this should take a few seconds. Perfect. And right now if we go back to our web browser and let's refresh this, and let's say I'm looking for my name, we can see nothing is happening and nothing is working, because we need to add that functionality to our class. So how do we add this functionality to our class? The first thing that we need to touch upon is this one here. So as we have said before, we have added the type any for our user list just in order for us to display this information. TypeScript is a strongly typed language, and it's really recommended for us to have a strongly typed list, our array here. And one of the main benefits of using TypeScript is allowing us to create our own strongly typed our strongly typed variables. One of the main benefits of using TypeScript is to allow us to create our own strongly typed variables. So to fix this, we need to specify an interface, and basically an interface, if you're coming from a different language like C# or Java, it's basically a class that we are creating. So inside Angular there's two types of interfaces. There's the interface which has all of the functions that we need to implement. Basically it's like a set of rules that every class implements. Needs to implement all of those methods inside that interface. And the different types of interface is basically, it's like a class where we specify all of the information and all of the attributes that we need and we can actually utilize. So right now we're going to be creating type 2, which is basically a list of all of the variables, and then we're going to be utilizing here inside the user class. So how do we create an interface? Again, it's very simple. Since we're already having this interface for the users, so we need to create it inside the users folder. So we right click on the users folder, we create a new file, and we're going to be calling it user.ts. I apologize. Let's rename it to user.ts. Great. And inside this user.ts, so we can make this interface available anywhere in our application. As we said before, it needs to be an export, and then we need to add the word interface, and then interface, and then there's two naming convention for an interface. You can actually name it iUser, so basically interface user, or you can have it as user. For the sake of this sample, we're gonna put iUser, so we know it's an interface, and after that we're just gonna be putting two brackets to identify it. So the first one is export, interface, and then of type of iUser. And then after that, basically we're gonna be defining the fields of this interface. So we said gonna be user ID of type number, and then we're gonna put full name of type string, and oh sorry, I typed interface wrong. Yeah, full name of type string, and then it's gonna be email of type string, and then it's gonna be phone of type number for now, and then lastly it's gonna be country of type string. Basically this interface here is gonna be mimicking this one here. So right now we can see here that we have user ID, full name, email, phone, and country, and here we have the same thing, user ID, full name, email, phone, and country. Perfect. So once we have that there, we save it, and now let's go back to our component. The first thing we're gonna be doing is we need to import that interface inside this component. How do we do that? That's correct, we have to add it here, import, and it's called iUser, and since it's already in the same folder, all we need to do is ./user, and that's it. And now we can actually utilize it here. And how can we utilize it? All we need to do is just change this to iUser, and now we can see it automatically picked it up. So let's say, for example, if we change country here to country A, we can see it give us a squiggly line, because now it's strong type and it needs to match directly what we have inside the interface, so it will not accept it. But before, if we left this at any, we can see it already accepted it, because basically it's not doing any strongly typed binding. But once we switch it to iUser, it is doing a strongly typed binding, so it will not accept this change. So we need to delete the A, and now it should work correctly. Let us run this application and make sure that everything is still running as it should be. This should take a few seconds. Great. Now let's open our web browser and let's refresh. Great, we can see everything is still running. This functionality is still working, but the filtration is not working, we're working on it. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let us stop this application, and after that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing something called the application lifecycle of our application, in order for us to understand how a component loads, and then from that point forward, we are able to understand where are we going to add the filtration process in order for us to be able to accomplish the filtration on that table. So the application lifecycle is managed by Angular, and Angular basically creates a component. Then it renders the UI of that component. If that components have any children, it will automatically create them, and then it will automatically render those children. Once that component is created and children is created, any actions or any feedback that comes from the components using the two-way binding is automatically processed. And once we finish from that component, Angular destroy that component and we do not use it anymore. So basically, a life cycle hook is an interface that we can implement to write our code. So let's say right now we want to implement any kind of functionality on the creating component lifecycle. So let's say we want to connect to a database, to connect to an API and load all of this data from the API. The best way to do that is inside the create component hook, and then we can implement what we want inside that. So basically there is three main type of lifecycle hook that we can utilize. There's a lot more, but for now we're going to be focusing on three lifecycle hooks. The first one we're going to be utilizing is the on init, on changes, and on destroy. The first one is on init. Basically, whenever a new component is initialized, we can utilize it in order for us to load information, and on init is the best place to put anything that's related to retrieving data from the API. So if we're gonna, for example, call an API, pull some data from there, the best place to do all of that is inside the on init hook. On changes mean anything that we do when we change any of the input properties. We have not covered that yet, but once we have covered it, we will discuss it. And lastly, on destroy, once we are finished from using a component and we need to do some cleanup, we need to do some data management, we can perform that on the on destroy hook. So for our use cases right now, we're going to be utilizing the on init, and in order for us to utilize it here as well, what we need to do is we need to input the on init inside our component. So how do we do that? Let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and let us implement that. So inside here, what we need to do inside on the import component, because the on init hook is already provided for us inside the Angular core library. So what we need to do is add a comma, and here we need to put on init. Great. So on init here means that we have automatically enabled the on init hook inside this component. So let's save it here, and we need to actually implement this on init for our class. So how do we do that? All we need to type is implements on init. And as we said, because on init is basically an interface, it will allow us, we need to follow those interface rules. And how do we follow those rules? We need to create that method, and that method is ng on init, and it's going to be of type void, and That's it. So right now, for example, if we put console.log and we say I am loading on ng on init, and we save this and we run our application, if we go back to our web browser and open the inspect element and we go to our console, let's see if it's building. Still building, yes. Now the build has completed. Now let's go back to our web browser and let's refresh. We can see that I am loading on init has automatically showed for us, because inside that hook, whenever that component is being initiated, we have called that function, we have loaded the console log, and then the function has resumed, the component has resumed doing its work. Great. So the next step is basically we're gonna be utilizing, or basically we're gonna be discussing different ways that we can define a property inside Angular. And after that, I promise we're gonna be implementing the functionality of filtering. So to define a variable inside, or to define a property inside TypeScript, there's two ways. There's a simple way and there is the advanced way. The simple way is, as we can see here from the first screen, is this is what we have done before. So we have a name, we can directly define the type for it, and we can define the variable directly from here. So this is a very simple way. Basically, we're just on a single line, we're defining the setters and the getters for it. The more advanced way is we actually define those functions, which is the setters and the getters, and basically we have more control over how this information is being set and how is the information being retrieved. So within the advanced way, we are enabling to execute certain methods, certain actions whenever we are getting the information or whenever we are setting this information. So for example, here inside this advanced method here, if we want the name to be, for example, capitalized when we are getting it, what we can do is inside the curly braces, we can add the logic to capitalize and then return back the information to the template. And similar to the on the setter, if we, for example, we want to lowercase, or we need to, for example, analyze the name, or we want to, for example, convert it to I don't know, base 64, for example, we can do all of this here, and before we can actually save it. And we can see, in order for us to utilize the getters and the setters within TypeScript, we need to always have a private type that no one can access except those getters and setters. And that way, for example, here we have a private type and it has the underscore for it, which means that it's private, and we define it as a name, and it's empty right now here. And inside our getters, basically we are setting this name, we're getting this name, and on the setters we're basically saving any value we're getting it, and we're saving it inside this private value. So why do we are discussing this here, the advanced type and the simple type? Because for our filtration, basically whenever the value for the filtration is being filled on the setter, we are directly gonna be calling the functionality to filter the process. So whenever the user is typing inside of it and using the two-way binding, it's actually saving the information of that field. We are actually gonna be executing the filtration process. So now let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and inside Visual Studio Code, basically we're gonna be updating our components to take advantage of this. So first of all, here we have defined this list filter. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna convert this into a private list filter, and then basically we're gonna be defining a the getters and the setter for this list filter. So we're gonna make it get list filter, and basically it's gonna return a type string, and all it's gonna do is return the underscore list filter. Similarly to the setter, we're gonna doing the opposite. So set list filter, it's gonna take a value of type string, and this value basically for now it's gonna be this dot underscore list filter equal value. And what we're gonna do here as well is we're gonna be adding the, let's add a comment here, adding the filtration process to the view. the process. So inside this filtration process here, we're gonna create it right now. So how are we gonna do this filtration process? Again, it's very easy. So what we have here is we have a list of users, and this list of users, we shouldn't really change it. Any filtration, we need to copy this list of users into another list, and we can actually implement it from there. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna be creating a new list of users, and we're gonna call it filtered users, and it's gonna be also of type iUser array, and basically it's gonna be empty. Great. Next step is we're gonna create a function, and this function is basically gonna be to perform the filtration. So after the ng on it, we're gonna create a new method which is gonna be perform filtration, and it's gonna utilize the filter by keyword, and then let's put the B capital, and it's gonna be of type string. And what does it gonna return? It's gonna return a list of iUsers, not a list, sorry, an array of iUser. And then basically what are we gonna be doing? We're gonna be in order for us to cater for all of the changes, we're gonna be converting the filter by to lowercase. So filter by equal filter by dot to lowercase. Great. And then what we're gonna do, we're gonna be utilizing an arrow function. An arrow function is like an anonymous function we can use in order for us to execute it, our command. So this dot users dot filter. So this is the filter keyword that's automatically provided for us by Angular. And here we're gonna be using user as an iUser. And basically within this arrow function, user dot full name, basically we're gonna be filtering on full name. We're gonna be converting it to lowercase, and then from here we need to make sure it includes the filter by criteria that we have, and that's it for that function itself. So if you have any question about how to use arrow function, please type it down in the comments down below, and I'll make sure I'll cover it more in depth in our future video. So once we have done this, the next step for us is we need to initialize the filter by that we have on the loading. So on ng init, let's convert this list filter into something into an empty one so we can utilize it. So this dot list filter equal, because we don't want it to have anything in on loading, we need to fill it out ourselves. So let's make it empty. And then the last thing we're going to be doing is inside the template where we're going to be displaying the user, we're not going to be showing the normal list of users, we're going to be showing them the filtered list of users. So oh, we didn't do that code here. Okay, that's good, we figured it out here. So this here needs to be this dot underscore filtered list of users. Is this what we called it? Filtered users, yeah, it's equal to perform filtration, and then here is gonna take the value. Okay, great. And now here on the front end we need to show this instead of the users. Let's stop this application and run it again. Now this should take another few seconds to be completed. Perfect. Now let's go back to our web browser and let's refresh. This should also take, and now if we type here, we can see here the filtration is automatically working. If we put Feynman, it's working. If we put Tyson, it's working. If we put it's working. Perfect. So let's do a quick summary of what we have done so far. So the first thing we did is let's go back to Visual Studio Code so we can go through it. So the first thing we did is we converted the variable that we have created, which is list filter, from it should be filter here. So let's Control F, I think, Control Shift, Control F, and we can change it to list filter. Okay, perfect. Okay, so what we did is we converted this list filter from a simple initialization to a getter and setter implementation, so we can have more control over what's happening. And after we did that, we have defined the getter, then we have defined the setter for it, and then what we did is we have created an empty list of users called filtered user, which is going to be holding all of the empty list results that we have. And then we have created a function called perform filtration, which is going to take a string as the keywords for the filtration, and then we converted that filtration keywords into lowercase, so we have all of the cases covered. And then we have utilized an arrow function, and this arrow function basically it matches the keyword with anything inside the first name, because basically we're only matching on the full name, and basically if it includes anything inside that full name, it's showing. And once we have done that, we have returned this results to the filtered result, and then we're displaying in the template. And we have utilized the ng init here to make sure that whenever the component loads, the filter is empty. Okay, great. So this is this completes our first part of Angular introduction. Thank you very much for watching. You can find the source code in the description down below. Please put any emoticons inside the comments to make sure that you have reached the end of this video and I know who actually completed this video. And within the next part of Angular, we're gonna be actually communicating with an API and loading the data dynamically instead of us hard coding it inside our component. And then we're going to be also adding some style sheets and adding more functionality into our Angular application. Thanks a lot for watching again, and have a good day.